Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is Grab Life by the RV, and today we are doing brakes and bearings on the RV. So I'm going to do a step-by-step as far as replacing the entire hub and also the brake assembly, and I'm going to go over that right now. Just a little something to go over. Anybody who's willing to do this job on their own and save a little bit of money, highly recommended as doing this job. If you were to pay an RV tech to come out, you're looking at least $700 just in parts. Labor, you're looking at another between $500 to $800 depending on the type of tech that comes out. Now, for me, I'm only paying for parts because I'm doing this myself. But you will need a flathead screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver, a pair of pliers, a grease gun, whether it's electric or hand pumped, some type of a hammer. Preferably, you would want to use a rubber mallet just because it's going to be easier on some of the delicate tools you'll be using. Some people like to use a 2x4. I'm using my butt plate that I use for my flooring inside of my RV. Pair of wire strippers, lots of towels, either an impact or electric, or you can even do hand tools. It's whatever you prefer. I also have my electric socket wrench, but then also I have a bearing re-grease tool there. Now some people like to put bearings, like to re-grease a bearing by hand, which is called packing a bearing. I personally do not like that. So now, with all of the tools that we have, oh, and I almost forgot, you cannot do this job unless you don't care about getting your hands dirty. But I hate touching bearing grease with my hands. I absolutely hate it. So I highly recommend gloves because you will get dirty. So with that, let's get started. Normally when doing this, you would remove these caps with the rubber mallet. I already have all of the replacement parts that I need, so I'm just taking all of these off. Next you have your that's your castle nut cap. Some of these have a cotter pin that you would put through. This is just like a cap that goes over the top to keep this sealed and keeps it from coming apart. Now, when doing this, I like to have a nice clean surface that I can set everything on, because I'm going to be cleaning and reusing this, my nut that comes off, which these are hand tight, so you can take them off very easily. We'll wash that up in a minute. Now here, I have to get this washer off, and all this hub does is you just put your hands back here, pull a little bit, and that washer comes out, and also the outer bearing. Now, if all you're ever doing is just a bearing job and you don't need to replace your brakes, you're going to want to look at your bearing and see if there's any discoloration, any bearings that are black. Also, you're going to look at this discoloration of the grease that's inside, because that's also going to tell you if you need to replace the bearing. But also looking at the play. So this specific bearing, I mean, it wobbles back and forth quite a bit. And I personally don't think I'll reuse this, because I'm also seeing a lot of grease that is discolored in here as well. This grease that was used before was a red. And I'm going to go over what kind of grease to use when doing this job. So here, just showing you, these are two different types of grease that I have. I am already using this green grease. A lot of people like to use this red and tacky. I honestly prefer whatever's going to have me or have the best protection or operating range. I really like the operating range of -20 to 400 just because this also has saltwater corrosion prevention, whereas the red and tacky, it has a little bit higher drop point, but this synthetic grease, the green grease, I've heard from a lot of people, does really well. Personally, I like the green grease, but for whatever purpose you're using this for, I mean, if you're using it for a brake job on your trailer, either one of these is going to do great. Oops, did I move that? Now, it's really simple. This hub just slides off after you get this specific front bearing off. Just comes right off. Just like so. Now, if you were adjust that. If you were only doing the bearing kit, right inside of here, this is your inner bearing seal, and your bearing is behind it. Where I am literally replacing all of the components, I'm doing the brake assembly and the hub. I'm just going to slide this over, but normally you would pop this seal out and either replace this bearing or repack the bearing to whatever specifications you are doing on a brake job or a trailer. And then next, this is where I'm going to use my impact. Now, this is really simple. Oops. When taking the brake assembly off, you can just give it a couple taps from the back side and then carefully remove this. Normally you want to remove these wires, but I'm showing you so that I can demonstrate. These are the electric brake wires. Now, if you do not have electric brakes, then you don't have to worry about this. This is where the wire snippers come in handy. Just snap. And out with the old, and now in with the new. Now, before we put this new brake assembly on, we want to make sure that we clean up this, your axle shaft. This area needs to have all new grease on it because you don't want to have any bad grease or contaminants that go inside of your new bearings. So now that that's cleaned up, take our brake assembly and we can place it back on the exact same way that the old one came off. Now, something to note. When changing your RV or trailer or whatever trailer brakes you have, if they are the drum, so this specific piece, which is your magnet, this is a floating magnet that engages if it's electric. If it's not electric, if it's hydraulic, or if it's cable driven, this one is electronic. So this magnet hits the inside of the drum, which then forces the brake to expand these brakes, and they then help stop the vehicle, of course. But one thing to keep in mind when mounting these, this arm right here, this arm is vital that you have it facing towards the front of the vehicle. If they're facing like this, or if this arm happens to be on this side and you're putting it on the right side of your RV or trailer, then you're mounting it incorrectly, and you want to switch it because these arms should be facing towards the front of the vehicle. So now I'm just going to mount these back up, and I'm just going to reuse the same bolts that came with it, because this kit that I got from Amazon, which I'll go over that later, I don't like the bolts that it came with. There it is. Now, this impact that I have torques things down at about 120 pounds. I go a little further with my wrench, but when mounting these, make sure you do it the same way you would a tire. So, star pattern. So I go here, go directly across, then across. And this one's kind of tricky. And then that's where I switch to my torque wrench, and I just give it a couple good turns, or one good turn. But you don't want to torque these down too tight, because you will strip them and you will have to replace the nut and the bolt. But you also don't want to be too loose, because you don't want your tire coming off on you, or your brake assembly. Oh, and I just messed up. I went in the wrong order. Dang it. That's what I get for trying to videotape and talk at the same time. Okay, now that that's done, so next, if you are reusing any parts, so for instance, I'm using my bearing cap along with that washer. I'm going to make sure all of these are all cleaned up, especially because the bearings that came out were very, very discolored. Or I should say the grease was very discolored. now that the 3 pieces that are going to go on the front right here are all taken care of, I'm not going to reuse this, so that can go over in the junk pile. I'm definitely not going to reuse these bearings. I'm going to throw these ones away. I normally would keep spares. I have spares that have already come off on the other wheels that I've done, but this one I'm not going to keep, so that's going to go in the junk pile as well. Now, this very important part. If you have a grease fill, this little cap right here, that's my grease fill, so I can refill the grease inside of this shaft. If you do have that, something that is very, very important to make sure that you don't put any contaminated grease. Dang it. I don't know how to do this without touching the GoPro. So right here, as you can see, that's the old grease, red grease. Oh shoot, it's about, ooh, okay, that was close. Now, once we have all the green grease that comes through, and we're gonna have to clean that up in a minute because we do not want grease on that component. So there we go, all new grease is through. Now this is very, very important that this does not stay on here. You do not want grease on that part of your brake assembly. That will just cause problems later on for you. And you'll just end up having to do this job all over again. So you want to make sure it's all cleaned off. Now it's also very important that you do not let any grease get on your brake pads, as that will also cause issues later on, and you'll end up just replacing the pads later on down the road. So now, I'll come back over here. I'm going to show you the new hub assembly. So that's the new hub. That's what's going to go on the front. So now, the new bearing which they look like this. They spin really freely. You know, there shouldn't be a whole lot of play in these. And then the front bearing, which is just a little bit smaller. Now, when placing this bearing in, I'm not going to do it now because I have to repack this bearing, but you would put your bearing in small side facing in, like so. But first, we have to repack this. So, I'll just have to show you. So when packing a bearing, you want to get plenty of grease. Now the bearing already has a little bit on it, but now we're just going to take the bearing and going around, getting it in every crevice. Sorry, not paying attention to the camera. So yeah, it should look nice and gooey and gucky like that. Wipe off the excess. Make sure it goes in the front. sure you turn it to get grease on every single bearing on the inside. It's really difficult sometimes to do this by hand because you have to try and get the internal areas turned, which is really hard when it's brand new grease. So now that the bearing is packed, we're just going to drop it in. Again, small side going in first. Just goes in like so. We'll take a little bit of grease right here. Oh, I almost forgot. Take a little bit in here. I'm going to lube this up as much as you can. Hang on.
Sorry. What are you doing, sir? No, but he will when he's done. Just go to the bathroom, Roman. Well, then don't go.
Now, I'm not going to fill this up too much because I can refill all of this inside from my grease fill. But I am going to take the bearing now. I'm going to plop it in. And next, we need to put our bearing seal. This is one reason why I like gloves. This is gross. This stuff feels like glue in your hands, like a nasty glue that.
I'm so glad that you got it on my camera.
Oh, it's not on there.
Dude, it's all over. I can see spray and I can feel it.
Well, it comes off really easy.
No, it doesn't.
Now, the kit that I got off of Amazon, which was recommended to me by Camping World, it came with 2 different sets of bearing seals. And so you definitely want to make sure that when using your bearing seal, just really quickly, you want to make sure it fits. Not too tight, but definitely not too loose. See, that one's perfect. This one, the other one that it came with, if I was to try and use that, it doesn't even fit. I'd break the seal and end up with a problem down the road if I tried to use this specific bearing. So make sure you know, or sorry, not bearing, seals. Make sure you know which seals to use. Next, we're going to place the seal right there on the top. We use our little handy dandy laminate floor tool because it works just as fine, just as good. You want to try and hit even pressure all around. Check your seal, make sure it doesn't have any high spots. And it's a little high right there, actually. That's better. Okay. And next,
What are you doing?
you're just not. Now, the hub's gonna go on. Doesn't matter what way you put it on, because it's just. Oh, I almost forgot. I am gonna put a little bit of grease on this. Ooh, that was close. Let's drop that. There we go. So now that's on. Next, now we've got our exterior bearing. We have to do the same thing. Pack this. I'm just gonna do a quick pack because I'm running out of battery. Alright. Oh, so that bearing is nice and packed. So next, your outer bearing again. Small side goes in first. Just fits in just like so. Next, you have your spacer that goes on. I'm going to put some grease on that. And then your locking nut. Most have a castle nut, but my specific axles have a divot right here that I don't want to use the castle nut. Now, this is where a lot of people get this mixed up and think, oh, I need to tighten this all the way down, when you don't. You don't want to tighten this all the way down. So there's a lot of people who have different methods where either they will go hand tight or they'll tighten it down and then back it off half a turn or a full turn. Personally, my hands were cleaner. I like to make sure that the hub assembly doesn't have any kind of wobble. I mean, a teeny tiny play is okay. But for instance, it's out here and you're doing this, that's too much play. Put it into hand tight. Right there. There is no play. And it spins freely. Okay? Now after spinning it, it will come a little bit loose. I recommend keeping it just a teeny bit loose, okay? You don't want these too tight. If you tighten this locking nut too tight, you're gonna seize your bearings up and you're gonna be doing this job all over again. There. That's on. Now, I'm going to re-grease. Just going to give it there we go. It's full. Now, how I know it's full is my grease gun, it stopped pumping. It was giving me a little bit of resistance, which means that cylinder on the inner cylinder is full of grease. and I don't need to try and force any more in there, so that could cause more problems. But now, you have your end cap. There's a couple different kinds. You have this one, which has a little washer on the exterior. These little washers are pretty easy. They just they pop in and out. These are nice because if you ever need to access this to re-grease this, you simply just pop these out and it's very easily accessible. Now, the sealed option, which does not have that, I don't like these because, again, if I need to re-grease any of my bearings, well, I have to take this whole cap off, which a lot of times people damage these permanently and it can cause, you have to replace them. So we're just going to use this one, and right back to using this piece or a rubber mallet. Just want to make sure you get it on there. And check to make sure it's evenly sealed all the way around. And that's it. That is a bearing and brake job. Now, the last thing I have to do here is I have to connect these wires. That's just simply connecting wires. I'm not going to do that in this video. Well, that's it for the brake and bearing job today on the RV. If you have any questions, please comment down below. And also, if you have any suggestions, just because I know that I'm doing this myself, and a lot of people have different ways of doing these jobs. They have different tools. But if you have any suggestions or have any questions, again, drop them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Grab Life by the RV.